Hello, and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is Chris Muntz. I'm the host of the show and have been since February of 2019. The show is approaching 6 years this upcoming February, and we have had an influx of new listeners, subscribers, and curious Georges on all of the show's feeds and platforms and locations, whether it be social media or right here on the podcast itself or on YouTube over the last week. So, welcome. We are super glad to have you no matter what brought you here to the Choralosophy Podcast. So I thought it would be a really good time, since it's been almost 6 years since I've created some type of a here's what we do here kind of an episode. This would be a good time since there's so many new folks hanging around. You'll find some of those early mission and values types of conversations that I had with the audience in the early years in 2019, some into 2020, but of course, nobody goes back all the way to the beginning of a podcast feed to listen and gather some type of a context on what a show is and what its audience is expecting to hear. And with new people that have come around lately, I thought this would be a good idea because boy, howdy, has it grown and changed since 2019 in so many ways. As always, once you've heard my thoughts on really what I'm calling now my 5 core values for this show, in other words, these are the 5 things that you are going to find pretty much every week when you tune into this show. Maybe some on one week and others on other weeks. There's, of course, a weekly show, so the topics aren't always the same. It's a wide-ranging, choral-centered conversation going on here. But it's not always specifically about notes and rhythms. Sometimes we talk about the things that we interact with as choral professionals, as music educators, and sometimes as people when we walk into our choir rooms. So this essentially will serve as a mission statement. Attention event organizers. Ludus is here to take your events to the next level. Imagine a ticketing platform that's not just about tickets. Ludus offers marketing, fundraising, and even volunteer management, all in one place. It's time to streamline your event management process and impress your attendees. Join the Ludus family today and unlock endless possibilities for your events. Go to ludus.com/choralosophy and try it out now, free to you. And if you use that link, you'll get the marketing feature free to your customers as well. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. Underwriting and crucial support for this show comes from listeners themselves who choose to subscribe on Patreon or now on Substack. Subscribers get access to the private podcast feed as well as my Google folder full of goodies and much more. The producers on Patreon are Brian Long, Venture Studios, Jonah Clixbull, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakacek. Whenever I create an episode, I am trying to challenge, to question dogma, to facilitate conversation, to demonstrate pedagogies, but also, more importantly, to learn with you as the audience member. I have learned so much over the nearly 6 years on this podcast. I have taken new ideas from colleagues directly into my classroom. I have changed my opinion on various touchy topics over the years, sometimes right in the middle of the conversation. That is what we're trying to demonstrate here. We are trying to demonstrate the flexibility of intellectual humility related to choral music. Mission number 1. We are trying to create a high-quality, informative podcast or video, whichever you prefer, and a community for music educators, choral music fans, people who care about education or music education in general. There's really a lot going on here and a little bit for everybody. We have a lot of people who listen to this show who are not choral musicians at all. They just find the conversations interesting, all the way to choral musicians and teachers and educators who tune in occasionally to get the PD that they would like, and some, of course, the diehards, the regular listeners every week, just wanting to be part of the conversation. The result of all that is the largest library of free music education, professional development, and conversation in the world. And it's still growing. This is a unique platform. We are working really, really hard together. When I say we, I don't just mean me. This is a team effort with colleagues and the listeners. The listeners to this show have been incredible, and they have been such an important part of the growth of the platform. Listening, of course, responding, telling me when they think I'm dumb, asking questions when they don't quite understand. And what's been really, really cool is when they invite me out to work with their choirs, to share some of the ideas, to workshop some of the ideas in a profound display of curiosity. The idea that maybe I didn't learn about this in college, but I want to explore this more. That's what we're trying to do. That is mission number one, is to create a professional development vehicle and space for educators, for choral music fans to come to be stimulated to hear things about our art form in a new way and be encouraged to be curious about choral music. Mission number two, to advocate for the value and importance of music literacy in education. Literacy in general in education. But of course, this is mostly a music podcast because I'm a music teacher. We're also trying to provide resources for teachers wanting to enhance their own pedagogy related to music literacy. This goes hand in hand with the belief that literacy is a powerful path toward equity for student opportunities. There are lots of episodes on this topic. I would encourage you to go back and check out the Choralosophy Music Literacy Suite, which I've created as a link on the website. If you go choralosophy.com/music literacy, all one word, you're going to see a lot of things that I think are big sources of misunderstanding about what it is that I'm trying to do with music literacy. Of course, I can't hold a person's hand if they're not willing to go and listen to episodes. You can go look up the word literacy, and I think in a lot of ways it applies very well to the arguments that I am making regarding music literacy and why it's so important, how directly connected it is to the part of our brain that learns language. That is the crux of my argument. It is a language in the same way that other languages are, and we are helping our students tremendously when we teach them to read the music. Now, that is not the same as saying that we only use our eyes. That's another common misunderstanding with the literacy approach that you'll hear here. We are not talking only about our eyes. That's why I've gone on the record recently, on a couple episodes ago, to talk about how I do not like the term sight reading, because I think it creates some of these misconceptions. The idea that reading music is not an oral art form, because, oh my goodness, it is. This is something I talk about in my classroom almost every day. How important is our ability to hear? How important is our ability to listen and to have music living in our head? That is so important to the ability to read fluently. So it's an eye and an ear process. And you can head over to that link that I mentioned, choralosophy.com/music literacy, and walk all the way through the process, the procedures, the pedagogy, but also the arguments in favor of this approach. That is a major part of the platform, but it's not the only thing that we talk about here. Mission number 3, to elevate the diversity of the human experience across all dimensions through the lens of the choir as the microcosm of humanity. That is my belief and my passion about choral music, is that we are a microcosm. We are a metaphor for humanity as a whole. If we can't get along in choir, then we can't get along anywhere. It is difficult. It's challenging. People from everywhere and all types and all kinds come to the choir. And in what ways can we, A, preserve our individuality, and B, reach a cohesion? And we actually don't have to choose between those things. We can maintain our individuality and reach a cohesion. And that's the beautiful thing about diversity, but it's also the beautiful thing about choral music. Because keep in mind, there is diversity between groups, but also within all groups of people. No single group of people thinks with a common mind. They don't speak with a common voice. There is diversity between groups, of course, but there is also diversity within groups. Individuals, I would argue, also contain diversities within themselves. I am not the same person that I was 6 years ago when this show started. I am definitely not the same person I was when I was 25 years old. So these are different ideas that are discussed here on the podcast regarding how we interact with our singers and how we form relationships. If we are a teacher, especially, the relationship aspect of our profession is so important. But they are also, again, metaphors for the choral music that we make, and this diversity that I'm talking about, this human diversity, is as beautiful as the music that we make. It is such a beautiful thing. And it needs to be uplifted, elevated. It needs to be celebrated. And that is something that you will find in many, many episodes on this podcast. But sometimes those conversations about diversity can be difficult. They can be challenging because of the diversity. That's the ironic thing about a diversity conversation. So many people see the world differently that any conversation about who we are at a core fundamental level, who are we in terms of race, in terms of our sexualities, our genders, how we express ourselves to the world, is highly complicated. One of the challenges that I've found over the years doing this show and trying to navigate what I call tough conversations, which you can find a YouTube playlist of conversations that I felt, even as publishing the conversations, could be touchy. They could be the types of conversations that a person would go, wow, I'm not used to hearing people talk about that stuff in public, especially in an academic field like music education. That's weird. I'm not used to hearing that. And yet we are constantly being told that having tough conversations is really important. I'm a believer in tough conversations. I believe we have to have them. Now, one thing, of course, that I think is important that you know, listeners, is that I am not expecting you to agree with me on how I approach the tough conversation. But I do expect that a listener comes to the show knowing that they might hear a tough conversation, and they might hear it from a perspective that they're not used to hearing. But I can assure you that all of these conversations are approached with care. All right. So that is something that is difficult for some people to wrap their head around, in that this conversation always is two-sided. This show is actually billed as a conversation. It is not billed as an interview show. I am not inviting guests on to interview them. I'm inviting guests on to have a conversation with them. And those are two different things. So that's something to be aware of, and whether it's the diversity conversation or whether it is a music literacy conversation. I actually really love it when a guest is willing to be comfortable enough to disagree with me right here in the middle of the podcast and say, actually, no, I don't think I would say it that way. Or, no, I don't like the way you said that. I'm going to say that differently. Or, I disagree flat out. It's happened many times over the years, and it actually has never led to a fight. It's just a conversation between two people who believe that the other person is approaching it in good faith with the desire to move the conversation forward. Sheet Music Plus has everything that you might need. And to make it even better, they are running a back-to-school sale all summer long. 10% off of the things that you would need for choir, band, orchestra, your methods classes, etc., to get you set up for a school year of success. But then year-round, there are discounts as well. So make sure you head over to sheetmusicplus.com, throw that into your rotation of places that you use to find your materials for class. Mission number 4 is to provide a space, to build a platform where we, as colleagues in music education, can foster and model ways to treat colleagues that we would be proud of, that we would be proud of in our classrooms, that we would be proud of in our homes. We're going to assume good faith. What does that mean? Assuming good faith means that if I hear a person saying something that I think is, that gives me the ick, I'm going to assume that I'm missing something, that person's not trying to give the ick. What they're trying to do is communicate something that's important to them. I'm just not seeing it. I'm not seeing what they're doing. So instead of assuming that they are trying to get me in some way, I'm going to ask a question, a clarifying question. Did you mean, what are you trying to say? I'm not picking you up, right? That's an important norm in a professional setting that we should champion and celebrate, in my opinion. We should seek context. If we're going to form a strong opinion about a topic, we should dig into the information first. What's being said? What exactly is the idea underlying this? And it's okay if people don't have time. That's something I hear a lot too. I don't have time to listen to your podcast. I'm just going to be mad. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to have time to listen, but I think it's important then to say, well, then don't be mad. If you haven't done the digging about what is going on with a topic and why one person thinks one thing and the other person thinks another thing, then I don't think you're quite ready to make a decision about how you feel about that topic. And we're going to champion that norm here. That is the professional norm that I think belongs in any academic or professional setting, let alone choral music. I think that's just a human norm and I mean, not a guy named Norm, of course, just a human thing that should be considered normal. And I think that that's actually not asking a whole lot, because when we do that, then we're free to ponder a new idea without panicking that it might not be the idea that we had yesterday. That's okay. We're able to do that. And when we do all those things, and that's what the great thing about this show for me in my life has been, is that when we do those things, we learn a lot. Over the course of the years, like I said before, I've learned a ton from guests, pulling in new ideas that I have never considered before. And I have had conversations with folks after episodes and with guests after episodes that they feel like they learned too. Now, does every guest come on with that open of a mind? No. No, in fact, one of the things that I've struggled to do sometimes over the years on the show is to adequately communicate to people, even though I do try, to send emails and to send messages ahead of time to people that this is not a infomercial. We're not having people on here to plug their programs. We're not having people on here to sell their sheet music. We have ads for that, for sure, but we keep those to a minimum. And when we have guests on, we're going to dig in. We're going to dig into the ideas that person stands for, that they believe in, and it is a conversation about ideas. When you tune into this show, that is what I'm trying to create. Some weeks I have more success than others getting guests to open up and just be themselves. But that is always the goal. I don't always pull it off. Like I said, I do about 50 episodes a year. This is a part-time job, so I'm always digging into it. I'm always trying to find people, and sometimes I swing, and sometimes I connect, and sometimes we miss. Part of it is like maybe me and the guest aren't speaking the same language, and there's no synergy. But of course, I'm not really trying to please every single guest audience member with every single episode. So that's something to consider. I'm trying to, over the course of the year, 50 episodes a year, trying to land several episodes that many, many colleagues would find useful. That's the goal, right? So if individual person comes to my podcast feed and looks through and they say, wow, okay, I'm interested in that one. That sounds dumb. This one looks interesting. Oh, that sounds cool. Then in my mind, I'm doing my job. Right. The topics are wide ranging, and some of them are going to land with the audience member and some of them will not. But ultimately, what I'm trying to do is do a job that I think is important, but also having fun, because we like to like our jobs. And so this conversation model that I'm describing in this goal number 4 or mission number 4 is crucial, because it also keeps me interested in doing this. It's one of the things that I find the most passion in is engaging in conversation with colleagues. It is so much fun. And I love that you get to be on a fly on the wall whenever you feel like it, even if it's 25 times a year or 20 times a year or 10 times a year. We like it when you tune in all 50, but even if you're only checking in every once in a while, then I feel like I'm doing my job. The show is here when you need it. The beauty of an on-demand podcast. And mission number 5, to present perspectives and conversations about complex topics that are important in our lives, classrooms, choirs, and communities. These are often best suited for long-form conversations, not Facebook blurbs, 2-line comments, 1 paragraph. Even sometimes a dissertation is not enough, because a dissertation doesn't involve a back and forth. A dissertation is simply a proclamation of an opinion. a proclamation of research findings, a proclamation of XYZ. It's theses pounded to the door. Conversation, and those are, that's not a disparagement, by the way, of a dissertation. I wrote a really long ass thesis once too, and I think it's really cool and really interesting, but it's not a conversation. We learn more from stories as humans and conversations. That's where we tend to get most of our learning. So we're trying to build that type of an environment here. And these long form conversations oftentimes are necessary because without that context, it is so easy to read in things that are not there. I use the example of the literacy conversation before, right? So if someone sees me post something about sight reading and then makes the assumption that I don't care about oral learning and oral music and call and response and gospel music and whatever, which is a conversation I've been having many times over the years. That popped up even back in 2019 when I first did an episode on music literacy pedagogy. It was a misunderstanding from the very, very beginning. All of those types of music making are crucial to learning how to be fully musically literate in the whole language of music, which includes ear and eye and body. Recently, we did an episode with Anita Collins of Bigger, Better Brains and TED Talk fame, talking about the music and the brain. Such an important episode. And she explains the research there of how important it is if the brain is going to grow from learning, if the brain is actually going to get bigger and better and stronger from learning, you've got to have what she calls that triangle. It's got to involve the eye, it's got to involve the ear, and it's got to involve the body. And that is just as true for learning to read music. You can't skip one. But again, there's that term on one of my memes, sight reading. Well, for a lot of people, they believe, and I think this does stem from piano ultimately, because that's partly where a lot of us get our first music training as music educators, is we can play the notes on the piano without hearing the notes in our head first. And so there is a sight reading component there where you can check the ear out of the box at first. Now, the ear will eventually develop by doing that. But that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about the pedagogy in my classroom. But of course, the way you would know that is by seeking context. And that is so important. And I will say on the way out here that this complexity of a lot of these topics leads a lot of people. And I know because I get messages by the hundreds every single year, sometimes like this week, in a week, hundreds and hundreds of messages about this idea that I am talking about right now, which is that these topics can be so complex that it leads a lot of people to just bow out of the conversation altogether because the conversation happens on Facebook. Okay, so a large number of people, and many of them are in this audience, don't engage in these conversations online because they just see it as not worth it. It is not worth me dropping my totally innocuous 3 sentences into a Facebook chat and then getting pounded on by people who are showing up in Facebook chats to be a scold. That's why they're there, is to figure out which word you said wrong or which phrase you said that sounds suspicious, like maybe you've got an ulterior motive, right? So most people don't even hang out on Facebook. And that's the beauty of this show. We don't live on Facebook. I have to live on Facebook sometimes because I honestly, I wish I didn't have to. But it's the way that I get people to see the show. It does have to be plugged algorithmically, or else people don't know it exists. So ultimately, this is where the audience members that really value this type of conversation come in. If and when, let's say when, you are telling a colleague in your local area why this Choralosophy podcast has been so valuable to you in your life, share the graphics. Share the graphics that I created for these 5 goals. They're going to be on Instagram. They're going to be on Facebook. I can send them to you if you're off social media. If you're welcome to send me an email at choralosophy@gmail.com, and I will blast them right back to you so that you can share. And when someone says, "Hey, why do you take time to listen to this Choralosophy podcast? How nerdy is that?" Well, because it does this, and this that I value. And we did a conversation in the Choralosophers Facebook group about these values before I did this episode. And I got a lot of great feedback about what the values are and about why a lot of people who listen to this show, why they're here. So for example, As one person said, I came for the music literacy pedagogy stuff, but I stayed because of the quality conversation, the respect, the digging into the ideas, and all of that we just talked about. I had some people that came for the opposite reason. They came because they see Facebook as a cesspool and they want to have a place off Facebook to have a conversation about choral music. And then they stayed for the cool pedagogical stuff, like the vocal ped episodes and the music literacy episodes and the classroom management episodes, the grading episodes. These tend to be lots and lots of value professional development wise, but then we can't ignore that also there is also value in building a community. And that is what we are trying to do here. That is the goal. The agenda is public. Please consider sharing it. Please consider joining over on the Choralosophy's Facebook page if you are brave enough to be on Facebook. And of course, now there's also an off Facebook place for us to connect, which is the Substack. Memberships there have boomed this week, which is exciting to see. And of course, you can get into the inner circle of support here on the Patreon, patreon.com/Choralosophy, or on Substack. You can do a free subscription where you get all the blogs and articles and contributors and stuff. Plus, you get links to all the shows as they come out. But you also get bonus content there if you choose to do a paid subscription to keep the lights on, literally and figuratively here, so that I can keep doing this show for another 6 years. Heck, why not do it again for 12 more years? This is so much fun, and I love it. I love you all. This has been such a great experience for the last 6 years, and I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate the feedback. Let's try to not make it 200 plus messages in a week. But because those messages were 95% extremely supportive and full of gratitude and richness, it really, really is keeping a lot of things in perspective for me right now. And I value this community so incredibly much. So keep listening, keep supporting our sponsors, sitereadingfactory.com. Use that promo code so they know that I sent you. Go to 3minutetheory.com. If you do not have those ready-made lesson plans that Matt over at 3-Minute Theory has created, go get that, and you can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout. And you can get choir folders. You can get all kinds of supplies for your choir at mychoirrobes.com and mychoirfolders.com. These companies have been with me since the beginning, for the most part, and are just incredible organizations with awesome people running them, great colleagues. So head over to those websites, use the promo code, buy yourself something, buy your program something. These things all keep the show going, and I can't do it without you. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. We resume regular programming with guests, with professional development, with new ideas, with new concepts. I've got, as of right now, 4 interviews scheduled over the next 2 weeks so that I can get back to regular business, and I'm excited for that. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of an episode. If you are still listening, that means you're one of the people who are MVPs of the Choralosophy Podcast, the people who stick around to the end. Of course, the ways to help are to use the Choralosophy promo code at sitereadingfactory.com, mymusicfolders.com, 3minutetheory.com, endeavormusicpublishing.com, graphitepublishing.com, and of course you can join the Patreon. Link is in the show notes. You can also subscribe at Substack and chip in a few dollars a month there. All of those things are great ways to help, and of course like, share, leave comments, be part of the conversation. That's what this is all about. See you guys next time.